The hunting ship's silent fang was dying. It floated in the dark space between stars, its engines broken and its lights flickering like a candle in the wind. The asteroid had come from nowhere. It had struck the back of the ship and torn through the engine room like a claw through flesh. Now the ship drifted, powerless and alone. Commander Veth stood on the bridge and watched the stars move slowly past the window. He was tall, even for a Krath. His scales were black like the deepest night, and his eyes burned amber like twin flames. His claws clicked against the metal floor as he paced back and forth. He was a predator. He was born to hunt, to chase, to kill. But now he could do nothing. He was trapped in a metal box floating through empty space, and it made him want to scream. The distress signal was working. Help would come. But the nearest Krath fleet was 18 cycles away. 18 cycles of waiting. 18 cycles of doing nothing. For a hunter, it was torture. There were 13 souls on the Silent Fang. 12 of them were Krath. They were hunters, all of them. Their bodies were built for speed and violence. They had scales that could turn aside knives. They had claws that could tear through metal. They had teeth designed to rip and shred. They were the top of the food chain on every world they had ever visited. The 13th soul was different. Park, though Yoon was human. He was short compared to the Krath, barely reaching Veth's chest. His skin was soft and easily cut. He had no claws, no fangs, no natural weapons of any kind. His eyes were dark brown, and his black hair was always slightly messy, no matter how much he tried to fix it. He had been aboard the Silent Fang for 6 months as part of a research program. He studied how Krath packs worked together. He watched how they hunted, how they communicated, how they made decisions. The Krath tolerated him. Some of them even found him amusing. He was like a small pet that could talk, they thought. Harmless and strange. They did not understand why humans sent scientists to study other species. The Krath did not study their prey. They simply ate it. Do-Yoon was in his small cabin when the asteroid hit. He had been thrown against the wall and nearly knocked unconscious. When he made his way to the bridge, he found chaos. Krath hunters were running everywhere, their voices raised in anger and fear. The ship groaned around them like a wounded animal. Now, 2 days later, things had settled into a tense quiet. The Krath had done everything they could. The engines could not be fixed without parts they did not have. The life support was stable. They had enough air and water. They had food for the adults, but there was a problem. A serious problem. In the lower section of the ship, in a warm room lined with soft materials, there were 3 cubs. They were small, barely larger than human children. Their scales were still soft, and their claws had not yet hardened. They belonged to Syrah, the hunting mother. Syrah was not like the other Krath. She was smaller than the males, but no one on the ship was foolish enough to challenge her. A hunting mother protecting her young was the most dangerous creature in Krath society. Her eyes were pale gold, and when she looked at someone, they felt like prey. The cubs needed food, but not the dried and preserved meat that the adults ate. Krath cubs were different. Their stomachs could only process fresh meat, living meat. Their hunting instincts required movement to trigger feeding. It was how Krath children learned to hunt from their first days of life. They chased. They caught. They ate. Without living prey, their bodies would not accept food. They would simply starve. On a normal ship, there would be live animals kept for exactly this purpose. Small creatures bred to feed the young. But the Silent Fang was a hunting vessel. It was designed for short missions. No one had expected to need such things. Veth called a meeting in the main hall. All 12 Krath gathered, their large bodies filling the space. Do-Hyun stood in the corner, watching and listening. The cubs will die in 10 cycles if we do not find a solution, Beth said. His voice was flat, but Do-yoon could see the tension in his shoulders. Does anyone have ideas? Silence. The hunters looked at each other. They were killers, not problem solvers. They knew how to track prey across a planet. They knew how to fight and how to win. But they did not know how to create food from nothing. We could hunt, said Corinth, the navigator. He was lean and fast, with gray scales that helped him blend into shadows. If we find a planet nearby with life, we could take a shuttle and bring back prey. Veth shook his head. The shuttles were damaged, and the nearest planet with life is 12 cycles away at shuttle speed. The cubs will be dead before we arrive. More silence. Sierra stood at the back of the room, her arms crossed, her eyes burning with desperate anger. She said nothing, but everyone could feel her presence. Her cubs were dying, and her pack was failing her. Dae-hyun watched it all. His mind was working, turning the problem over and over like a puzzle. He thought about what he knew of craft biology. He thought about the ship's systems. He thought about the basic principles of life that humans had learned over thousands of years of survival. The Krath were hunters. They took life. They did not create it. But humans were different. Humans had spent their entire history learning to make something from nothing. They farmed. They bred animals. They built ecosystems in bottles. They grew food in deserts and on space stations and in the frozen wastelands of distant moons. Maybe, Dae-hyun thought, he could do something the Krath could not even imagine. He pushed himself away from the wall and walked toward Commander Veth. Every Krath eye in the room turned to look at him. He felt very small. He felt very soft. He felt very human. Commander, he said, his voice steady despite his racing heart. I think I can help. Veth looked down at him with something between amusement and confusion. You? What can a human do that 12 Krath hunters cannot? Do-hyun took a breath. I can grow food for the cubs. The room went completely silent. Then, slowly, Sierra stepped forward. Her claws extended from her fingers, gleaming in the dim light. She stopped directly in front of Do-hyun, so close he could feel the heat from her body. Explain, she said. It was not a request, and so Do-hyun began to explain. He told them about farming, about breeding, about creating life instead of taking it. The Krath listened with expressions that ranged from confusion to disbelief to something that looked almost like fear. They did not understand. But they were desperate, and desperation, Do-hyun knew, could make even predators willing to try something new. The Krath did not understand what Do-hyun was saying. They stood in the main hall with their arms crossed and their eyes narrow. Some of them growled low in their throats. Others simply stared at him like he had lost his mind. You want to grow meat, Beth said slowly. He said the words like they tasted bad in his mouth. Like a plant. Like grass. Not exactly, Do-hyun said. He kept his voice calm and clear. He had learned that the Krath respected confidence. If he showed fear, they would dismiss him immediately. I want to breed small creatures, insects. They reproduce fast. They eat almost anything. And they move, which means the cubs will be able to hunt them. Corinth let out a harsh laugh. Insects? You want to feed the children of a hunting mother with bugs? I want to keep them alive, Do-hyun replied. Unless you have a better idea. Corinth's laugh died in his throat. He looked away. No one had a better idea. That was the problem. Sarah had not moved. She stood like a statue carved from dark stone, her pale gold eyes fixed on Do-hyun's face. He could not read her expression. He did not know if she wanted to thank him or kill him. With a hunting mother, both were possible. Where will you get these insects? She asked. Her voice was quiet, but it carried through the room like a blade. The ship has a waste recycling system, Do-hyun explained. It breaks down organic material and converts it into nutrients for the water and air systems. I can redirect some of that output. There should also be biological samples in the science lab. Bacteria, fungi, maybe some preserved specimens. I can work with whatever is available. Veth's eyes narrowed. You have done this before? Grown creatures from nothing? Not from nothing, Do-hyun said. From resources? From waste. From things that seem useless but actually contain everything needed for life. He paused. Humans have been doing this for thousands of years. We call it farming. The word meant nothing to the Krath. They did not have a translation for it in their language. They had never needed one. The Krath took what they wanted from the universe. They did not ask. They did not grow. They did not wait. They simply hunted and killed and consumed. Idea that a species would deliberately create the things they needed instead of taking them was alien to everything the Krath understood about survival. This is prey thinking, said one of the hunters. His name was Torith, and he was the largest Krath on the ship. His scales were dark red, and his voice rumbled like distant thunder. We do not grow our food. We are not weak creatures hiding in holes, waiting for things to grow. We are hunters. Your cubs are dying, Do-hyun said simply. Does it matter how they are saved? Torith stepped forward, his claws extending. But before he could reach Do-hyun, Syrah moved. She was fast, faster than Do-hyun could follow. One moment she was standing still. The next moment she was between Torith and the human, her own claws out, her teeth bared. Touch him, she said, and I will open your throat. Torith froze. He was bigger than Syrah. He was stronger than Syrah. But she was a hunting mother, and her cubs were in danger. There was no creature in the universe more deadly than that. Slowly, Torith stepped back. His claws retracted. He lowered his eyes. Syrah turned to Do-hyun. What do you need? Do-hyun felt his heart pounding in his chest, but he kept his face calm. Access to the hydroponics bay. Access to the waste recycling system. Any biological samples from the science lab. And a room that I can seal and control the temperature in. Veth considered this for a long moment. Then he nodded. You will have what you need. But understand this, human. If you fail, if the cubs die because of your strange ideas, I will not be able to protect you from their mother. Do-hyun looked at Syrah. She met his gaze without blinking. If I fail, he said, I will deserve whatever she does to me. The work began immediately. Do-hyun had Corinth help him move equipment from the science lab to a small storage room near the back of the ship. The room was perfect. It was warm, it was sealed, and it had its own air circulation system. He could control everything that happened inside. The science lab had more than he expected. There were preserved specimens of various alien species collected during previous missions. There were cultures of bacteria kept for medical research. And there were eggs. Thousands of tiny eggs from a creature called a tunnel worm, a small invertebrate that lived in the soil of a dozen different planets. The Krath had collected them as samples. They had never imagined they would be useful. Tunnel worms were perfect. They were small, about the size of a human finger when fully grown. They moved constantly, wiggling and squirming in search of food. They could eat almost any organic material. And they reproduced incredibly fast. Under the right conditions, a single tunnel worm could produce hundreds of eggs in just a few days. Do-hyun set up the breeding chamber with careful precision. He lined the bottom with nutrient-rich material extracted from the waste recycling system. He adjusted the temperature and humidity. He placed the eggs in the center and sealed the room. Then he waited. The Krath watched him work with expressions of confusion and disgust. To them, what he was doing was unnatural, wrong, Hunters did not create prey. Hunters found prey and killed it. The idea of deliberately making something just so it could be eaten later disturbed them on a deep, instinctual level. But they said nothing. The cubs were getting weaker every day. Their eyes had lost their shine. They barely moved. Sierra spent every moment with them, curled around their small bodies, trying to keep them warm. She had stopped eating. She had stopped sleeping. She was watching her children die, and there was nothing she could do about it. On the third day, Do-yoon checked the breeding chamber. The eggs had hatched. Thousands of tiny tunnel worms wiggled through the nutrient bed, eating and growing. They were still too small to feed to the cubs, but they were alive. The system was working. He reported his progress to Veth. The commander listened without expression. "How long until they are big enough?" Veth asked. "4 more days," Do-yoon said. "Maybe 5. The cubs need to hold on a little longer. They may not have 4 days." Don nodded. He knew. He had seen the cubs. He had seen how thin they were getting, how their small bodies trembled with weakness. He was in a race against time, and he was not sure he was going to win. That night, he stayed in the breeding chamber, watching the tunnel worms grow. He adjusted the temperature slightly. He added more nutrients. He did everything he could think of to make them grow faster. Outside, the ship drifted through the endless dark. Inside, a human sat alone in a small room, surrounded by wiggling creatures, trying to do something his entire species had done for millennia. But that seemed like magic to the hunters who watched him. He was growing life. He was creating food from waste. He was being human. And somewhere in the back of his mind, he wondered what the Krath would think of humanity when this was over. Would they see humans differently? Would they understand that there was more than one kind of strength in the universe? Or would they simply be afraid? He did not know. But for now, all that mattered was keeping 3 small cubs alive. Everything else could wait. 7 days had passed since the asteroid strike. 7 days of waiting. 7 days of watching the cubs grow weaker and weaker. Sierra had not left their side. Her scales had lost their shine. Her eyes were red from lack of sleep. She looked like a ghost of the fierce hunter she had been. The smallest cub was the worst. She was a female with beautiful silver streaks running through her dark scales. Her name was Vera, and she had been the strongest of the 3 when the journey began. Now she could barely lift her head. Her brothers Keth and Orn were not much better. They lay in a pile of soft blankets, their breathing shallow, their small bodies trembling. Do-yoon stood outside the nursery room, holding a container in his hands. Inside the container, dozens of tunnel worms wiggled and squirmed. They were fat now, each one as long as his finger and as thick as his thumb. They moved constantly, crawling over each other in an endless search for food. He had done it. Against all odds, he had created a sustainable food source in less than a week. The breeding chamber was now producing hundreds of worms per day. There was enough to feed the cubs until rescue arrived, and probably enough to keep producing indefinitely if needed. But none of that mattered if the cubs were too weak to eat. Do-yoon took a deep breath and entered the nursery. Every Krath on the ship had gathered to watch. They filled the corridor outside, their large bodies blocking the light. Veth stood at the front, his amber eyes fixed on Do-yoon. Beside him was Corinth, and behind them was Tarth and all the others. They were not here to help. They were here to witness, to see if the human's strange methods would work, to see if he had truly done the impossible. Sierra looked up as Do-yoon approached. For a moment, he saw something in her eyes that he had never seen before. Hope. Desperate, fragile hope. "I have food for them," Do-yoon said quietly. "Living food. It moves. They should be able to eat it." Sierra said nothing. She simply moved aside, giving him access to the cubs. Do-yoon knelt down beside Vera, the smallest cub. He opened the container and let a few worms fall onto the blanket near her nose. They immediately began to wiggle, trying to burrow into the soft fabric. For a terrible moment, nothing happened. Vera lay still, her eyes closed, her breathing barely visible. Do-hyun felt his heart sink. Had he been too late? Had all his work been for nothing? Then Vera's nose twitched. Her eyes snapped open. They were no longer dull and lifeless. They were sharp, focused, hungry. Ancient instincts that had been dormant for days suddenly awakened. Vera's head shot forward. Her small jaws opened. Her tiny teeth, still soft but already sharp, closed around the worm. She bit down. She swallowed. She grabbed another. The change was immediate and dramatic. The small cub, who had seemed moments from death, was suddenly alive with energy. She pounced on the worms, her claws pinning them down, her teeth tearing them apart. She ate with savage efficiency, her body remembering what it was designed to do. Keth and Orn stirred. They smelled the food. They saw their sister eating. Their own instincts kicked in, and suddenly all three cubs were hunting, chasing the worms across the blankets, fighting each other for the best pieces. Do-hyun poured more worms from the container. The cubs attacked them with joy. The sounds of crunching and growling filled the small room. It was violent and messy and absolutely beautiful. Syrah watched her children eat. Tears ran down her scales, leaving wet trails on her face. Krath did not cry often. Their biology made it difficult. But some emotions were too strong, even for predator physiology. "You saved them," she said. Her voice was barely a whisper. "You saved my children." Do-hyun shook his head. "They saved themselves. I just gave them something to hunt." Syrah reached out and touched his shoulder. Her claws were retracted, and her touch was gentle. It was a gesture of pack bonding, something Krath only did with their closest family members. "You are pack now," she said. "Whatever else happens, whatever the others think, you are pack to me and my cubs." In the corridor, the watching Krath shifted uncomfortably. They had seen something they did not understand. They had watched a soft, weak, clawless human do something the 12 trained hunters could not do. He had not fought anything. He had not killed anything. He had simply created life where there was none before. Veth stepped into the room. He looked at the cubs, now playing with each other, their bellies full, their energy returning. He looked at the container of worms, still half full. He looked at Do-hyun. "How long can you keep making these creatures?" he asked. "As long as you need," Do-hyun replied. "The breeding chamber is self-sustaining now. It will produce food continuously." Veth was silent for a long moment. Then he did something that shocked everyone in the room. He lowered his head to Do-hyun, a gesture of respect that Krath usually reserved for superior hunters or elders. "I do not understand how you did this," Veth said. "I do not understand how your mind works. But you have saved the children of my ship. You have my gratitude." Do-hyun nodded, accepting the gesture. "The cubs are strong. They just needed a chance." As the excitement died down and the cubs fell asleep with full stomachs for the first time in days, Do-hyun returned to his cabin. He was exhausted. He barely slept in a week. His body ached and his mind was foggy. But he felt a deep satisfaction that he had not felt in years. He had done something good, something important. He had used the skills that humans had developed over thousands of years of struggle and survival. And he had used them to save lives. That night, as he finally drifted off to sleep, he did not notice the looks that some of the Krath gave him as they passed his door. He did not see the way they whispered to each other in the corridors. He did not feel the subtle shift in the atmosphere of the ship. The Krath were grateful. But they were also beginning to think, beginning to wonder. beginning to ask themselves questions that had never occurred to them before. What else could humans do? What other impossible things could they create from nothing? And if humans could do all of this without claws or fangs or scales, what did that mean for the Krath way of life? These questions did not have easy answers. And for a species that had always believed it was at the top of the food chain, they were very uncomfortable questions indeed. That those thoughts would come later. For now there was only relief. Only joy. Only 3 small cubs sleeping peacefully with full bellies, watched over by their mother and the strange human who had saved their lives. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. But tonight, at least, there was peace on the Silent Fang. 10 days after the asteroid strike, the cubs were growing stronger every day. They ran through the corridors of the Silent Fang, chasing each other, playing hunting games, filling the ship with noise and life. Vera, the smallest, had become the fastest. She loved to chase the tunnel worms that Do-Hyun brought her, pouncing on them with fierce joy. Do-Hyun had expanded his operation. The breeding chamber now produced enough worms to feed the cubs 3 times a day with plenty left over. He had also started experimenting with other food sources. He grew a simple fungus that could be processed into protein paste for the adult Krath. He cultivated bacteria that cleaned the air more efficiently than the ship's original systems. He was slowly transforming the broken vessel into something new. Something that did not just survive, but thrive. Dr. Krath watched all of this with growing unease. Late one night, Navigator Corinth found Commander Veth alone on the bridge. The commander was staring out at the stars, his amber eyes distant and troubled. "You are thinking about the human," Corinth said. It was not a question. Veth did not turn around. "I am thinking about what the human represents." Corinth moved to stand beside his commander. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The stars drifted past the window, cold and indifferent. "He frightens me," Corinth finally said. "Not him personally. He's small and weak, and I could kill him with one hand. But what he can do frightens me." "Yes," Veth agreed. "It frightens me too." Corinth's claws clicked nervously against the floor. "We are Krath. We are hunters. We have conquered 100 worlds. We have defeated every enemy we have ever faced. We are strong. We are fast. We are deadly. But the human—" He paused, searching for the right words. "The human does not fight. He does not need to fight. He simply makes problems disappear." Veth finally turned to look at his navigator. "What do you mean?" "Think about it, Commander. We were dying. The cubs were dying. We had no way to save them. Every hunter on this ship was helpless. And then a single human with no claws and no fangs and no scales solved the problem in less than a week. He did not find food. He made food. He created life from nothing." "Not from nothing," Veth corrected. "From waste. From things we throw away." "That is even worse," Corinth said. He looked at our garbage and saw possibility. He looked at death and saw life. We could never do that. Our minds do not work that way. We see prey or we see threats. We do not see potential." The words hung in the air between them. Both hunters understood what they meant. Both hunters felt the cold weight of the realization settling into their bones. "What happens," Corinth continued, his voice low, "when humans decide they do not want to trade with us anymore? What happens when they decide we are a threat?" "They will not fight us, Commander. They do not need to. They will simply wait. They will build and grow and create while we hunt and kill and consume. And eventually, they will outlast us." Veth turned back to the window. "You are saying that humans are more dangerous than we ever realized. I am saying that we have been thinking about strength the wrong way. We thought strength meant claws and teeth and the ability to kill. But humans have a different kind of strength. They survive. No matter what happens, no matter how bad things get, they find a way to survive. They adapt. They change. They overcome. The conversation spread through the ship like a slow poison. Krath whispered to each other in the corridors. They gathered in small groups and talked in low voices. They watched Do-hyun with new eyes. He was still the same person. He still smiled at them. He still worked tirelessly to improve the ship's systems. He still played with the cubs and helped Syrah keep them fed. But now the Krath saw something different when they looked at him. They saw potential. They saw threat. They saw the future. Tarth, the big red-scaled hunter who had threatened Do-hyun on the first day, approached him in the breeding chamber one afternoon. Do-hyun was checking the nutrient levels, making small adjustments to keep the worms healthy and productive. "Human?" Tarth said. His voice was strange. Not angry. Not threatening. Something else entirely. Do-hyun looked up. "Yes? How many worlds have your people settled?" The question surprised Do-hyun. "I'm not sure exactly. Thousands, maybe more." Tarth's claws flexed. "And on these worlds, do you grow food? Do you create life the way you have done here?" "Yes, that is how humans survive. We cannot hunt like you can. We are not fast enough or strong enough. So we learn to grow what we need instead of taking it. And if a world has no life, if it is just rock and ice?" Do-hyun shrugged. "We change it. We add air. We add water. We plant seeds. We make it alive." Tarth stared at him for a long moment. Then he turned and walked away without another word. Do-hyun watched him go, confused by the conversation, but too tired to think about it deeply. That night, Do-hyun noticed that the Krath were avoiding him. They would not meet his eyes. They stepped aside when he walked through the corridors. They fell silent when he entered a room. He asked Syrah about it. She was feeding the cubs, watching them chase worms across the floor of the nursery. "They are afraid," she said simply. "Afraid? Of what?" "Of you. Of what you represent." She looked at him with her pale gold eyes. "You have shown them something they did not want to see. You have shown them that there is more than one way to be strong." Do-hyun did not know how to respond to that. He sat down beside her and watched the cubs play. Vera caught a particularly fat worm and held it up triumphantly before swallowing it whole. "I did not mean to frighten anyone," he said finally. "I just wanted to help." "I know," Syrah said. "That is what makes it worse. You were not trying to prove anything. You were not trying to show us how weak we are. You simply did what humans do. You solved the problem. And in doing so, you showed us that the universe is much bigger and more complicated than we ever imagined." She reached out and touched his hand. Her claws were retracted, and her scales were warm against his skin. "Do not blame them for being afraid," she said. "They have spent their whole lives believing they were the strongest creatures in the universe. You have shown them that strength means nothing if you cannot adapt. That is a hard lesson for a hunter to learn." Do-hyun nodded slowly. He understood now. He had not just saved the cubs. He had changed how an entire species saw itself. And that change was painful and frightening and strange. The cubs finished eating and came to curl up beside their mother. Vera climbed into Do-hyun's lap and pressed her snout against his hand. She was warm and soft and completely trusting. To her, he was not a threat or a mystery. He was simply Pak. "What happens now?" Do-hyun asked quietly. "Now we wait for rescue," Syrah replied. "And we see what the future holds. For all of us." Outside the nursery, the ship drifted through the dark. And in the corridors, the Krath hunters wrestled with questions they had never asked before and fears they did not know how to name. On the 17th day, rescue arrived. The Krath battlecruiser Crimson Dawn, emerged from faster-than-light travel like a predator bursting from shadows. It was massive, 10 times the size of the Silent Fang, bristling with weapons and engines. It moved through space with the confidence of a creature that had never known defeat. Commander Veth stood on the bridge of his wounded ship and watched the Crimson Dawn approach. He felt relief, of course. They were saved. They would survive. But he also felt something else. Something that felt strangely like sadness. For 17 days, his ship had been a small world unto itself. A place where impossible things had happened. Where a human had saved craft lives. Where the old rules had been broken and new truths had been revealed. Now the rescue ship was here. And everything would change. The docking procedure took 2 hours. Engineers from the Crimson Dawn swarmed over the Silent Fang, assessing damage, making repairs, preparing the wounded vessel for the journey home. Medical officers checked each crew member. Supply officers restocked food and water. And High Commander Thesa came aboard. She was old. Ancient by craft standards. Her scales had faded from black to pale gray, and her eyes were clouded with age. But her mind was sharp, and her authority was absolute. She had commanded fleets. She had won wars. She had watched the Krath Empire grow from a single planet to 100 systems. She walked through the corridors of the Silent Fang with slow, deliberate steps. Her guards followed behind her, but she needed no protection. No one would dare threaten the High Commander. She stopped at the breeding chamber. She looked inside at the tunnel worms crawling through their nutrient bed. She studied the system that Do-Yun had built. The careful balance of life that kept producing food day after day. Then she turned to Commander Veth, who had followed her through the ship. "Bring me the human," she said. Du-Hyan was in the nursery when the summons came. He was playing with the cubs, letting them chase his hands, laughing as Vera pounced on his fingers with mock ferocity. Syrah watched from the corner, a rare smile on her face. 2 guards appeared in the doorway. "The High Commander wishes to see you," one of them said. Du-Hyan stood up slowly. He had known this moment was coming. He had known that eventually the Krath leadership would want to understand what had happened on this ship. Syrah rose as well. "I will come with you," she said. The guards looked at each other. They did not want to argue with a hunting mother. They simply nodded and led the way. High Commander Thesa was waiting in the main hall. She sat in the commander's chair, her ancient body still radiating power and authority. Around her stood the senior officers of both ships. All of them were watching Do-Hyun as he entered. He walked to the center of the room and stopped. He did not bow or kneel. Humans did not do that. But he stood straight and met the High Commander's eyes without fear. Thesa studied him for a long moment. Her clouded eyes moved over his soft skin, his clawless hands, his small body. She was looking at something that should have been prey. Something weak. Something beneath notice. "You kept the cubs alive," she said. Her voice was dry and rough, like old leather. "Yes, High Commander. Tell me how." Do-Hyun explained. He described the breeding chamber, the nutrient extraction, the tunnel worms, the entire system he had built from scraps and waste. He spoke clearly and simply, without boasting or false modesty. When he finished, Thesa was silent for a long time. The other craft shifted nervously. No one spoke. "Commander Veth," Thesa finally said, "your official report will note that this human demonstrated a survival capability beyond anything in Krath biological or cultural history." "Yes, High Commander," Veth replied. Thesa turned back to Do-Hyun. Her eyes were sharp despite their age. They saw through him, into him, around him. She was reading him the way a hunter reads prey. "Your species frightens me, human," she said. The words hung in the air. Several craft gasped. A High Commander admitting fear was almost unheard of. Not because you are strong, Thesa continued. You are not strong. Not in the way we understand strength. Your bodies are weak. Your senses are dull. You have no natural weapons. She leaned forward slightly. You frighten me because you are adaptable. You do not accept death. You negotiate with it. You bargain with it. You find ways around it. Dawn said nothing. He simply listened. We Krath have conquered 100 worlds, Thesa said. We have defeated enemy we have ever faced. We believed we were the ultimate predators. The top of every food chain. She paused. But predators are specialists. We are designed for one thing: hunting, killing, consuming. When the hunt fails, we die. She stood up slowly, her old joints creaking. She walked toward Do-yoon until she stood directly in front of him. Up close, he could see the scars that covered her scales, the marks of 100 battles. Humans are not specialists, she said quietly. You are generalists. You can hunt, but you can also grow. You can fight, but you can also build. You can kill, but you can also create. When one path fails, you find another, and another, and another. You never stop. She reached out and touched his shoulder. Her claws were retracted, but he could feel their potential danger. That is why you frighten me, she said. Because I do not know how to defeat an enemy who refuses to stop trying, who looks at impossible situations and sees opportunities, who takes waste and makes life. She turned away and walked back to the commander's chair. She sat down heavily, suddenly looking every year of her great age. Go now, she said. Return to your people. Tell them what happened here, and tell them that the Krath remember their debts. You saved Krath lives. That will not be forgotten. Dawn nodded. He turned to leave. But before he reached the door, he stopped. High Commander, he said. May I say one thing? Thesa waved her hand. Speak. Humans are not your enemies. We do not want to compete with you or defeat you. We just want to survive. And maybe... He paused, choosing his words carefully. Maybe we can learn from each other. You can teach us how to be stronger. We can teach you how to adapt. Together, we might both become something better than we are alone. Thesa looked at him with an expression he could not read. Then, slowly, she nodded. Perhaps, she said. Perhaps. As Do-yoon left the main hall, the 3 cubs came running up to him. They had escaped from the nursery and come looking for their favorite human. Vera jumped into his arms. Kath and Orn wrapped around his legs. Sarah followed behind them, not bothering to hide her smile. They will miss you, she said. Do-yoon looked down at the cubs, at Vera's silver-streaked scales, at her bright eyes full of life and energy, eyes that had been dull and dying just 2 weeks ago. I will miss them too, he said. The transfer to the rescue ship happened the next morning. Do-yoon packed his few belongings and prepared to say goodbye. Every Krath on the Silent Fang came to see him off. Even Torith, who had threatened to kill him on the first day, stood in the crowd with something like respect in his eyes. Syrah was the last to say goodbye. She pressed her forehead against his, a gesture of deepest pack bonding. You will always have a place among us, she said. You will always be pack. Thank you, Do-yoon replied. Take care of the cubs, always. As the shuttle carried him away from the Silent Fang, Do-yoon looked back at the wounded ship. It was small and broken, floating in the endless dark. But it had become something more during the past 17 days. It had become a place where the impossible happened, where old beliefs were challenged, where new understandings were born. He did not know what the future would bring. He did not know how the Krath would change, or if they would change at all. But he knew one thing for certain. The universe had just become a more interesting place. And somewhere out there, 3 small cubs were alive, because a human had refused to accept that death was inevitable. That, he thought, was worth everything.